A teacher saves an abused student girl. Next week, she received a phone call that changed everything. Welcome back and enjoy the story. The fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous tune across the yellowed ceiling tiles as Helen Martinez wiped the chalkboard clean, her weathered hands moving in practiced, methodical strokes across the dusty green surface. At 64, she had performed this exact ritual thousands of times in Roosevelt Elementary's West Wing. But today, something felt fundamentally different in the stale air around her cramped classroom. The narrow hallway beyond her wooden classroom door carried an unusual tension, thick and oppressive like the heavy atmosphere before a violent thunderstorm breaks across Chicago's sprawling skyline. Her grey wool cardigan hung loose over her stooped shoulders as she paused mid-stroke, tilting her silver-haired head toward the muffled sound that made her blood run cold. A child's desperate, heartbreaking whimper echoing from somewhere near the dented metal supply closet at the corridor's far end. Helen's deeply ingrained maternal instincts, carefully honed and refined by 42 years of teaching, Chicago's forgotten and systematically overlooked children, propelled her tired, aching body forward without a moment's hesitation. Her sensible, black shoes clicked rhythmically against the worn, scuffed linoleum as she approached the source of the heartbreaking sound with growing urgency. Behind the dented metal door, she discovered 12-year-old Betty Thompson crouched defensively against the cold concrete wall, her small, malnourished frame trembling violently like a fragile autumn leaf caught in winter's harsh, unforgiving wind. The girl's auburn hair hung in tangled, unwashed curtains around her pale, gaunt face, and her oversized backpack sat beside her like a burden far too heavy for such fragile, bony shoulders to bear alone. Dark purple circles shadowed her hollow, eyes like fresh bruises, and the way she instinctively flinched when Helen's shadow fell across her huddled form told a tragic story no innocent child should ever have to live through in their young life. "Sweetheart," Helen whispered softly, kneeling beside the frightened girl with the infinite gentleness she'd learned from decades of carefully mending broken spirits and wounded young hearts. Betty's wide, terrified eyes darted immediately toward the exit, frantically calculating potential escape routes like a cornered animal, desperately seeking freedom from an invisible predator lurking nearby. Helen recognized all the telltale signs with heartbreaking clarity. The hypervigilance that came from living in constant, paralyzing fear, the protective way Betty's thin hands covered her obviously bruised ribs, the silent scream of anguish, trapped behind her trembling, colorless lips. Without asking probing questions that might frighten the vulnerable child further into her protective shell, Helen simply said with unwavering conviction and motherly warmth, "You're not alone anymore." "Honey, not anymore, I promise you that with all my heart." The late afternoon sun cast long, dancing shadows across Helen's cluttered classroom as she wrapped her spare wool cardigan around Betty's violently shaking shoulders and gently guided her to the comfortable chair beside the old cast-iron radiator that had warmed countless students over the decades. Steam hissed softly and rhythmically from the ancient heating system as Helen prepared steaming tea from her personal thermos, following the same comforting ritual that had provided solace and comfort to countless troubled students over her long, dedicated career. Betty's skeletal fingers wrapped around the warm ceramic cup like it represented the first genuine kindness she'd ever received in her short, difficult life, and Helen's experienced heart ached deeply watching this fragile child desperately clutch at such simple human comfort and basic dignity. The life-changing decision came without any hesitation. Helen reached across her desk for the telephone she'd hoped never to use and dialed the familiar number that would irrevocably change everything for both of them. But what Betty whispered next in her small, broken voice would haunt Helen's restless dreams for many weeks to come and beyond. Social services personnel arrived at the school just as the building emptied of students and staff, their official bureaucratic presence instantly transforming Helen's warm sanctuary into something clinical, sterile, and frighteningly cold. Betty didn't shed a single tear when the professionals explained in measured professional tones that she would be taken to a temporary foster home that very night for her own safety. She didn't ask desperate questions or make impossible demands, or beg pitifully to stay in the only safe place she'd known in months. She simply stood silently at the classroom door, her eyes wide with the terrible adult understanding that safety might prove temporary and fleeting, and whispered in a voice barely audible above the radiator's hissing, "Will I still have my seat tomorrow, Miss Helen?" The innocent question pierced Helen's protective heart like nothing had in her entire professional career, cutting cleanly through decades of carefully maintained emotional distance she'd built to survive the heartbreak of her chosen profession. What neither of them knew was that this moment would become the foundation of something extraordinary and life-changing. The empty chair haunted Helen's thoughts for days that stretched endlessly into painful, sleepless weeks filled with worry and regret. She deliberately left it positioned exactly as Betty had arranged it, angled slightly toward the tall window where warm afternoon light pooled consistently on the worn, faded linoleum floor. Her other students asked repeatedly about their missing classmate with genuine concern, but Helen deflected their curious questions with practiced teacher diplomacy, all while mechanically watering classroom plants and grading homework papers. That seemed to blur meaninglessly together. The familiar daily rhythm of her structured classroom felt hollow and incomplete, like beautiful music missing its most essential, harmonious note that tied everything together. She had reported suspected abuse cases before during her career, had made those difficult, heartbreaking calls to authorities, but something about Betty's profound silence and desperate eyes echoed differently in her troubled dreams each night. The week passed with agonizing slowness, each day bringing fresh worry about Betty's well-being and safety. Helen found herself staring at the empty chair during lessons, wondering if she had done the right thing, if Betty was safe, if the girl understood that Helen's actions came from love rather than betrayal. The other teachers noticed Helen's distraction, but respectfully gave her space, understanding that some burdens were too personal to share easily. Helen's modest apartment felt even lonelier than usual, filled with the weight of wondering whether one moment of intervention could truly save a child's life, or if she had simply moved Betty from one form of suffering to another. Friday afternoon brought unexpected, blessed relief when Helen's old desk phone rang shrilly, just as she was gathering her belongings to leave for another weekend of worry. The voice on the other end was small, but surprisingly determined. Betty, herself, calling from her temporary placement with obvious effort and courage. The assigned social worker had graciously given her exactly 5 precious minutes to call someone she genuinely trusted, and somehow, miraculously, she had chosen Helen above all others in her young life. Through tears and stuttered emotional words that spoke of resilience beyond her years, Betty thanked her devoted teacher for truly seeing her, for hearing the desperate cries no one else seemed to notice or care about in her daily struggles. Helen gripped the phone receiver with visibly shaking hands, promising regular visits and constant letters, creating a sturdy bridge of hope across an uncertain future that neither could predict. Have you ever experienced or known someone who has experienced something similar to what Betty went through? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The heartfelt correspondence began immediately and quickly, became Helen's vital lifeline to renewed purpose and meaning in her later years. Helen sent carefully selected books with margins filled with encouraging handwritten notes, inspirational poems, underlined in bright red ink, and tiny origami stars with personal wishes folded lovingly inside each delicate creation. Betty's responses arrived weekly like clockwork, each letter revealing more psychological healing and steadily growing confidence that amazed everyone involved in her case. The complex foster system moved Betty twice within 6 months before finally placing her with the Hendersons, a genuinely caring couple whose natural kindness finally taught her what real family could look like when built on love rather than fear. Through every difficult transition and change, Helen's letters arrived with unwavering consistency, creating much-needed stability in a chaotic world that had previously offered none to this deserving child. Transformative years passed slowly, but steadily, changing both dedicated teacher and resilient student in profound ways neither had expected when they first met in that supply closet. Betty excelled academically with remarkable determination and focus, driven by the fundamental belief Helen had planted deep within her soul that she was truly worth saving, genuinely worth fighting for against all odds. She spoke passionately about her teacher to anyone who would listen, consistently crediting Helen with teaching her what genuine safety felt like, what unconditional support actually looked like when practiced daily. Helen watched proudly from afar as Betty grew steadily into her own impressive strength and character, each significant achievement serving as a powerful testament to the resilience neither of them knew existed that first day in the supply closet. Their special bond deepened, mysteriously through physical distance, proving conclusively that authentic love could transcend mere physical presence and geographic separation. The Henderson family embraced Betty completely, providing the stable home environment she desperately needed to heal and grow. Betty threw herself into her studies with passionate intensity, earning top grades and the respect of teachers who marveled at her determination. She joined the debate team, volunteered at local charities, and slowly learned to trust that good things could happen to her without being taken away. Helen visited monthly, watching with maternal pride as Betty transformed from a frightened, broken child into a confident young woman with dreams and ambitions that reached far beyond survival. Helen's quiet retirement came without fanfare, marked only by the usual modest ceremony of carefully boxed memories and thoroughly cleaned blackboards that had witnessed decades of learning. Longtime colleagues offered kind words and organized a simple celebration. But the real reward remained distant, growing in ways Helen couldn't yet imagine or understand completely. Her small, modest apartment felt oppressively quiet after decades of constant classroom chaos, filled now with heavy silence that her regular letters to Betty could only partially bridge during long afternoons. She wondered frequently during long evenings if she had truly done enough, if one crucial moment of intervention could actually change a life's entire trajectory in meaningful ways. The persistent doubt crept insidiously in during long, lonely evenings, when her life's purpose seemed unclear and her impact questionable. 3 springs later, an elegant cream envelope arrived that made Helen's arthritic hands tremble with nervous anticipation and hope. Inside was a formal, embossed invitation that took her breath away. The University of Chicago Law School respectfully requests your presence at the graduation ceremony of Betty J. Thompson, class valedictorian. Attached was a handwritten letter in flowing script that began, "Miss Helen, you saved my life completely and gave me everything I have today." The heartfelt words that followed spoke eloquently of safety learned, belief discovered, and a graduation, walk taken symbolically for both teacher and student who had shared this journey. Helen pressed the precious letter to her chest and whispered emotionally to her empty apartment walls, "You made it, sweetheart. You really made it against all odds and expectations." The momentous graduation day arrived with Helen wearing her finest navy dress, carefully saved for occasions that mattered most in life and held deep personal significance. Her wooden cane tapped gently against the university's polished marble floors as she found her reserved seat among rows of proud families celebrating their children's achievements. When Betty took the elevated podium in her deep blue graduation gown, golden tassel swinging confidently with each purposeful step, she didn't begin with traditional thank yous to professors or academic peers who had guided her studies. Instead, she looked directly into the crowded auditorium, found Helen's tear-filled eyes across the sea of faces, and declared with clear conviction and overwhelming gratitude, "This achievement is for the woman who gave me my first truly safe place, who showed me I was worth saving when no one else seemed to care." The packed auditorium fell completely silent, then erupted in thunderous, understanding applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The auditorium buzzed with powerful emotion as Betty continued her inspiring speech about second chances and the power of one person's compassion, but Helen sat frozen in place, completely overwhelmed by the magnitude of pure love radiating from the stage toward her. After the formal ceremony concluded, Betty ran through the crowd to her teacher, with the natural grace of someone who had learned to trust completely in happy endings and beautiful possibilities. They embraced tightly, like mother and daughter, rocking gently together while the dispersing crowd moved around them in celebration. In that perfect moment, the circle of healing completed itself beautifully in ways that transcended blood relations and legal definitions of family. "I filed all the paperwork," Betty whispered against Helen's shoulder, her voice strong with newfound confidence and maturity that spoke of hard-won wisdom. "I want you to be my legal guardian, my real family, if you'll still have me after all these years of separation." Helen's emotional response came not in words, but in the instinctive tightening of her arms, the gentle rocking motion that had comforted so many children throughout her long career as an educator. At 73 and 21 respectively, they were finally free to love each other, as the family they had always been destined to become through circumstances neither could have predicted. The smallest acts, a cup of tea, a spare cardigan, a phone call answered with compassion, had indeed changed not just a life but an entire destiny and future filled with possibilities. Together, they walked slowly into the Chicago sunset, teacher and student, mother and daughter, living proof that sometimes love speaks infinitely louder than blood, and that one person's decision to see and act courageously can echo powerfully through generations yet to come. Helen had saved Betty, but in doing so, Betty had saved Helen right back, filling her retirement years with the family she never knew she was meant to have all along. Their inspiring story became legend at Roosevelt Elementary, motivating other teachers to look closer, listen harder, and never underestimate the transformative power of seeing a child who feels invisible and forgotten by the world around them. Congratulations. Type 7 in the comments, so I know you stayed with me until the end. Leave a like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. See you.